It gives me great pleasure this morning to turn the tables on the famous Steve O'Hare, one of the most prolific tech journalists and professionals in this industry. And I was very, very pleased that Startup Grind gave me this opportunity this morning of really turning the tables. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Anne.
Right, to kick off, nobody likes having the DM from Steve at 10 o'clock at night which says, I've heard this rumour, followed up by some hard-hitting questions you can't wriggle out of. Many an entrepreneur in this audience has probably had those DMs. Does journalism matter?
Yes. I think the tech press has a couple of different roles, right? So firstly, I think we are the most basic, a conduit for getting certain industry information out in the public domain. And where we add value, hopefully, is that we act as a filter for what information is important, which is absolute PR rubbish. Yeah. And hopefully we can add some analysis and some context to that information. And then I think the second role we do, which is a lot harder, which I think was what you referred to with my late night DMs to you, is trying to tell some of the stories that perhaps people in the industry don't particularly want told, right? And that's always the conflict in tech journalism. You try to stay close to the companies and the people that you cover, but you don't want to be too close because sometimes you need to ask uncomfortable questions and, as I say, get information out like that frankly people don't really want to go in the public domain. That makes sense.
But you have some experience of being on the other side. You have entrepreneurial experience. You've done a startup, you've been a CEO. Did you learn something from it, you know, and did you bring something back from that experience into journalism? And because you do have this technique of really sort of asking some of the right questions. Is that from that experience of doing a startup?
So I did this startup and it wasn't very long. It was only sort of 18 months, I think. And we raised some VC funding and we launched. So we did that first kind of stage. And I guess my biggest takeaway from sort of an entrepreneurial point of view, that maybe I should have known, but it was a bit of a surprise and a bit of a dent to the old ego, which is that like we got tons of publicity. Like we were in the press everywhere. So we got more publicity than most startup at seed stage could ever dream of getting. And it didn't really move the needle on user numbers.
Yeah.
Right? Which is like, hey, it doesn't make any sense. We've done the hard bit, surely, like, you know, the users will come. And that was kind of a bit of a shock because then we were like, okay, now what? And ultimately the startup didn't really succeed. And the second thing that it affected me when I decided to come back to journalism, which thankfully TechCrunch wanted me back, which is fantastic, it made me want to be like tougher. And even though I had more empathy for the entrepreneur, I also had seen a bit more clearly the difference between what information is sometimes put out there and like the real story. So for example, we had an exit and we publicized the exit in a certain way. Yeah. And I obviously, I know the gory details. I know that when we raised funding, our funding came in tranches. There were preferential shares for investors, like all sorts of things that doesn't really get talked about. So yeah, it really opened up my eyes a bit more to be less the naive, idealistic sort of storyteller, more like, okay, what's really going on?
So your spell as an entrepreneur really gave you some of the tool sets, some of the information, some of the inside tracks to ask the right questions to entrepreneurs and really sort of sort out what's real, what's imaginary, what's puff, whatever. And you spend a lot of time sort of following people, investigating certain areas of the business, and you've become a bit of an expert on the challenger banks in recent years, whatever. Mm-hmm. So, how do you do it? You know, sort of, you know, for all the people here that actually read what you write, do you sort of are you working on 4 or 5 stories at once? Are you, you know, are you constantly, do you have a pattern of your day? How do you do it?
So, I have a pattern. I wish I was that organised. I tend to, these days, compared to like when I first started out in journalism, where I do a lot of stuff over email, and these days I spend a lot of time on the phone. So I have like, you know, I book like briefings like every single day. So every morning starts with briefings, but I'm also, in between that, I'm just tapping people up. I'm like, I've learned that the best time to talk to a founder is when they don't have any news, right? It's actually not to wait for the news and then they've got an agenda. It's to call them up and, you know, be like, hey, so what's happening? So in fintech, I'll regularly call up, I won't name the names, but various people, you'll know them all. Yeah. I regularly call them up, like, hey, what's going on? You know, what have you heard? What's changing in the marketplace at the moment? Who's raising? Who's not raising? What those user numbers that got released, are they real? You know, this is the kind of stuff, and I do that all the time. And I also really try to understand their business, because I think when an entrepreneur thinks I really get what the business model is and the challenges, they're, shall we say, they're a bit more talkative.
Yeah. So one thing I've realised is this is the first time we've actually met. But I feel as if I really know you, you know, and sometimes I'm terrified of you, you know, what are you going to write? Are you going to see what's happening there, whatever? How do you form relationships when most of your time you're communicating over the internet? How do you create this relationship without, you know, going down the pub and, you know, sort of chatting people up or whatever? How does it work?
So I often wonder, but I know what you're talking about. I mean, partly because of my disability, I don't tend to get out to many conferences. Yeah. I'm certainly not in the pub, like that stereotype of the journalist, you know, like half drunk in a pub, you know, seducing sources with alcohol. Yeah. That's not me, right? Yeah. So,
and perhaps that was the old way, and perhaps the new way is, you know, where, you know, we all live now, which is on the internet, talking all the time using social media.
I think part of it is generational. So you're right, it is just, these are the new ways of communicating. But I mean, I'm slightly older than I look, and I've always been quite good at manoeuvring online. So when I made a documentary on Silicon Valley in 2004, I set up every single interview before I got there. Yeah. So I'd already established all these sources. So I think it's, you know, I think it's partly just that's how things can be done now. But I think it's also partly I've had to overcompensate because of that slightly inability to really get out there in person as easily as everybody else. So I don't know, maybe.
I think that, and I think you've used your some of your fame on Twitter to really stand up for things that are important. And you took the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, to task for suggesting incorrectly that having disabled workers holds back the economy because they are associated with lower productivity. We know that research from the Institute of Fiscal Studies shows this is not true. And I watched you through that campaign. I watched you sort of edging forward, asking the questions, and you won, didn't you? Tell me about that.
I did. So I put in a freedom of information request. Yeah. Took months to come through, and then the Treasury had to issue a statement saying that it wasn't true that disabled people entering employment lowered the overall productivity levels of the UK economy, and also, you know, Philip Hammond had to backtrack that statement. However, you're right, I was quite angry at the time about it, because I know that many disabled people work incredibly hard and actually inadvertently potentially more productive because they already are natural problem solvers and they've already had to find ways of navigating their own obstacles in their own lives. So when they bring that to work, they potentially are even more efficient. But what was interesting about that comment by Philip Hammond wasn't so much that he said it, right? because politicians say stupid things when they're in a corner. It was actually the way it wasn't, I felt there wasn't enough uproar at the time amongst the wider press.
Yeah.
So, for example, I know that the editor of City AM, I think Christian May, wrote a column saying that people were upset about Hammond, not because he was wrong, but because it was insensitive to say such a thing. So you've got the editor of City AM piling in on this issue, you know, promoting something that is factually incorrect, as my freedom of information request proved. And that was, to me, that was more disappointing. But I guess that's another reason why startups should send me their news and not City AM, right?
But I think that was a very important moment, because I think you were out there sort of tweeting and not getting an awful lot of response until you held people to account and threatened, got people to actually backtrack on that.
That's right. It was funny, I was so upset about it that I think I was quite rude to a number of people that were known supporters of the government. And I won't name names, but one of them privately said to me, do you know what you want to do is put in an FOI request and prove that it's factually incorrect, which is, of course, what any good journalist would do. So I was like, oh yeah, okay, I missed the trick there. And then I did that, as you say, and then not only did I get the FOI back with categorically saying that it wasn't true, but I was able to also get Business Insider to write a follow-up article, which again was, I guess, using friends in the media.
You know, that's, you know, the political side, really, of Steve O'Hare. But, you know, you are a huge commentator on the industry, and, you know, now you know, probably a bit more of a fun question, but so you meet all these entrepreneurs. Who's your favourite entrepreneur? You know, and it's not me, okay?
No, I mean, I can't have favourites, right?
Oh, you can have, okay, you can give, who's good at what, you know, so that we've got all these entrepreneurs in the audience, and they, you know, everybody, it is really, really tough, you know, so when things are going really, really well in the press, it's probably going really badly at home, right? So when you look out there of who is really good at the craft, who do you see as being good for different things?
So I'm not going to name names, because I have to stay impartial. But I think the entrepreneurs I like are the ones that are relatively transparent, right? So I feel like we have there's a modern day kind of startup that likes to tell it a little bit more how it is, and acknowledge issues with scaling, acknowledge when they change their business plan. And communicate that in a really sort of constructive way. And the reason why I think that's important is I feel like at our worst, the tech press sort of publishes these stories sort of where starry-eyed entrepreneurs think that entrepreneurship is going to be one way. They get into it and they find it completely different to what they've read, right? So I think we see this in fintech actually quite a lot. There seems to be quite a lot more transparency about when things go wrong. So, for example, one of your competitors, when they had a problem with keeping the service live at one point because of some technical issues, they blogged. It was a very in-depth technical blog about what went wrong, why it went wrong, and why they hoped it wouldn't go wrong again in the future. So I mean, obviously I'm a journalist, so I want more transparency, right? That's what I fight with every day. Like, how can we get the industry to be more transparent and more open, and then everyone can learn from it, and hopefully less mistakes be made, and customers can get a fairer deal, etc.
I think we're going through a huge cultural revolution where transparency, community, engaging with customers is far more important. And this is the tech industry. What do you think of big tech? Is big tech transparent?
Big tech is anything but transparent, right? I might write about it soon, but there's if you watch startups as they get to a certain size, watch who they hire as their head of corporate communications, right? Because you see a trend where it stops being like a really good PR person from an agency. That's the obvious first choice. or maybe an ex-journalist. I've seen that happen many times. I think you may have hired one recently. And then you see them hire people who are more from a background of lobbying or political PR. And you say to yourself, why does a tech company need to hire an ex-political spin doctor? And then you realize that as tech gets more important, the intersection of tech and politics starts to collide, right? And I think when you start hiring people who are used to spinning around huge policy issues, it tells you something about some of the activities of these big tech companies.
So are you afraid of big tech?
I've always been really agnostic. So I remember even when I first entered this industry, non-tech friends, civilians would be like, is the internet good, is it bad? And I was like, I literally don't know. Like, I'm very agnostic about technology. I think all this crap about how technology is changing the world for the better. I mean, it's changing the world, but the assumption that it's always for the better is sort of slightly ridiculous. So I'm not afraid, I don't fear big tech, but it needs to be kept, needs to be held to account. And I think all this recent stuff around Facebook and data is quite healthy. I've always been suspicious of Facebook. And in a sense, this sort of stuff around social media is an engine for populism by its very nature. Algorithms promote the most popular stuff, and Facebook's ad engine is in a sense, an engine for mass manipulation. I mean, that's what it does, right? So, I do think this recent steps is healthy. It can go too far, obviously. You can get perfectly, good motivations in startups who are going to get caught in some of this hysteria. But as a general, the way the sort of thing swings back and forth, I think it's really, really healthy, this recent scrutiny.
But if you look to the future, what do you think is going to happen in 5 years, 10 years' time? We're in a, tech can do great things. Is it going to do useful things? Is it going to be used for the wrong political reasons? So when you look forward, what do you think tech and entrepreneurs and the startup world can do to make things better for mankind?
I think, I mean, that's a tough question, right? Because I think a lot of technology has been for good and is for good. When I think about how technology impacts my world, I mean, just having an always connected device on me at all times allows me to organise my life and around my disability and stuff, in a super efficient way. Yeah. I've recently made my house a little bit more of a smart home, so, just simple things like I can operate the central heating with a push of a button. I'm going to be getting a new door fitted, so I can let people in more easily. So there's all sorts of ways that tech, and even my job, we talked about this earlier. Yeah. There's no way I could be a journalist in the way I am right now without technology. I mean, it's paramount to what I do, right? It's quite funny. Technology enabled me to hold technology to account. Yeah. It's sort of full circle. But I think startups always have this problem that as they scale, the pressure to monetize in certain ways short-term gain rather than long-term existence is sort of a conflict, right? That can produce, some bad as well as good. I mean, you're running a challenger bank, you're going to have to monetize every current account. An obvious route to monetization is credit, lending, right? And lending needs to be responsible. I mean, I know you've written about this.
But I agree it's a dilemma. Sort of one of the reasons that I started Starling Bank is I thought the wrong sort of startups were coming into the lending world. They're the wrong sort of new entrants. And I felt quite passionate that it could be done, it should be done, and I was going to have a bash at doing it. I'm very positive that technology will change things for the better, will make it a much more equal society, and everybody can benefit from, generating more GDP. So if you had to give, and I know that you are political, so I look at your Twitter feed or whatever. If you had to give advice to the government today, what would that advice be?
Don't offer a referendum on EU membership. I think, listen, the UK tech scene is a little bit over London focused, so I would try and spread a bit more of the opportunity of sort of the digital ecosystem a bit more around the country, and that would obviously help in lots of other ways. I think what we've built here in the UK is amazing. I've been in this business long enough. I remember there was a joke we had when I first joined TechCrunch in Europe, which was like, every time there was a funding story, we'd be like, funding. We'd be saying that every 5 seconds, if that joke still existed. Thankfully it doesn't. So it's like, we built something amazing with Brexit happening and various other kind of policies around freedom of movement or immigration. Like, don't throw out what we built, because actually, even though there's been some recent stories this week with London Tech Week about how well we're doing, I mean, there's a lag, right? It's like we're benefiting from what we did 3, 4, 5 years ago. We're not benefiting from what we're doing now. And if we're inadvertently or advertently destroying that, we're not really going to know till 3, 4, 5 years' time. So I would say, like, the government needs to really understand what we've done here and how precious it is, and if we don't stay on top of our game, you know, Macron in France and other people in various other places, like, they've caught on that they needed to be doing the same. So yeah, I would just absolutely treasure and nurture what we've built and work out what it is that we've done that has worked, and hope that we don't completely destroy it post-Brexit.
I agree. You know, London, the UK at the moment is doing great things on the tech scene with great journalists like yourselves. I'm very, very proud to have turned the tables on you, Steve Aher.
Thanks, Anne.